Everybody caffeinated? If you caffeinate, good, good. All right, well, we are going to start lessons learned with Android Wear watch faces. We have Virginia and Jono Poltrack.
Yep.
And they're going to be talking about their experience with Android Wear and the things that they've learned and the pitfalls they've experienced and some of the awesome stuff that they've created. So give them a big hand.
Thank you, Tyson. So thanks everyone for coming out to our session today. We are going to be talking about all the mistakes that we made when we were building stuff for Android Wear. So we've built a couple things in the past year, and we're going to go over that, and hopefully you can avoid the pitfalls and mistakes that we made.
And we also realize we're between you and lunch, so I promise we will not run over.
I like
That's
that.
what I meant.
Thank you.
That's what I meant. So I'm Jono. We do have the same last name. We're married. But as it says here, I build things. So I'm a programmer. I went to school for computer science. And boy, 15 years ago, I started doing a lot of development, online learning type stuff, a lot for the Department of Defense, actually. And slowly I worked myself out of development. And I like to tell people now I'm a professional go-to-meetinger. I mean, that's pretty much what I do on a daily basis. However, as you see, Virginia has glass on, and when she entered the contest on Twitter, I said, well, I better learn how to do some of this stuff because I'm going to come home from my day job and start to write code again. So I took an online course through Coursera on Android development, which is actually pretty good. I learned a lot, and then I started coming to events like this, thinking, I know stuff, and people would look at me and say, man, you are doing it all wrong. Why are you using this? Why are you using that? So I learned enough to be dangerous in that course, and then I actually learned a lot from you guys. But anyway, yeah, my role in this team, other than husband, is I do the development.
And my name is Virginia, and my job on this team, other than to be his wife, is to make the stuff that he builds look good and help market it to people. I'm a freelance illustrator, designer. I work on everything from logos to websites to t-shirts and a whole mess of other stuff.
So I think I kind of started to say this. Don't develop every day. We're not really experts. I wouldn't even call myself an Android expert, which is really the platform you're developing here when you build for the watches. But we have learned a lot of valuable lessons. Oh.
This is what he really meant to say.
Is that better?
I made him add that slide, sorry.
So, okay, what do we want to give you in this session? So as we developed, we made a lot of somewhat common, we've seen them other places, and have actually been able to help some people when we saw them having the same mistakes. So, here's a couple examples. Battery drain, when you're dealing with a phone, at least when I was developing for a phone, you think about it, and you want to be efficient, but you've got a pretty powerful battery in that device, and it'll last, a couple days or at least a day. But when you're dealing with a very small form factor, you have to be a lot more cognizant of your battery use. Things like positioning on these devices, and we'll talk about that. Configuration activities we'll go into detail, and this list goes on and on and on. But we've learned some things during development that we want to make sure that we tell you guys about. So why wearables? Why are we even doing this?
So we got interested in this because there weren't a lot of people working in this space yet, right? There's a lot of phone apps, there's a lot of tablet apps, but especially when we got glass and when we got the smartwatches, there were a lot less people sort of in that space, and we wanted to be involved in this emerging technology and sort of learn as much as we could while we could, ahead of the curve, I guess you could say.
There are all kinds of trends that you can look at with wearable devices, and in addition to being like one of the few at this point, it's also a really cool platform. Recently, I left my watch at home on accident, and I realized that day how dependent I've become on it. So I'm used to now keeping my phone in my pocket. I'll be in a meeting, a text message comes in, where in the past I would have pulled it out, been very rude. Now I can just glance down like I'm looking at the time. It's not important, swipe it and move on. But anyway, until I left it at home, I didn't realize how much I actually depend on this. Also, loyalty cards. That's one of the things, everybody carries the loyalty cards on their keychain. It's something now, if I don't have my watch with me, I don't have any of my loyalty cards because they all come up in there. So it's little things like that that I've really become dependent on. So, using these devices, number one, for neat little apps, but also they give a whole ecosystem of devices you use, your phone, your Fitbit, your watches. You add context when you have this device. It has a different set of sensors. For example, I used to use a step tracker on my phone. It was horrible. But now the one on my watch actually works pretty well. So it works very well with my phone to give me better fitness statistics. So yeah, wearables, really cool market. We're excited to be kind of at the forefront of it while it's just getting started. So we're going to talk about a couple things. So we just talked about wearables in general, but we're going to talk about watch faces here specifically, so we'll cover that. We're going to talk about lessons learned during our development. And instead of just kind of going through A, B, C, D, here's some lessons, we're going to actually show it to you in context. As we were developing sets of watch faces, we hit certain issues. So as we go through the different watch faces we released, we'll show you the issues that we ran into specifically during that watch face development. And then we'll show you some Android Wear tools at the very end. What we won't do is we won't do a Android Wear 101 session. So, there's a lot that we could talk about. It would take more than the 35 or 30 minutes that we have here today on how you develop for these things and how you build watch faces. I will say there's a ton of resources out there. There's a lot of great examples. So if you're getting started, just go do a search, look at the developer page on Google, and there's plenty of information on getting started. But we're just going to focus, once you do get started, we'll focus on some issues that you might hit along the way. So why make watch faces?
So for this example, I'm going to have Jono tell you all about the tattoos that he's covered with. We're kidding, he doesn't have any tattoos, actually. That's just me. But we're using that as an example that each person has their own sort of style and aesthetic and things that they like. So when we first decided to start working on Android Wear watch faces, I went out to the Play Store and I looked at what was available. And it was beautifully rendered and lovely, but it wasn't something that I would wear. So it was sort of more Rolex, and I'm more Swatch watch. So that sort of frustrated me that I didn't see anything that I really liked for myself. So we said, okay, well, if I'm going to make something for myself, what am I going to make? So I have all these illustrations that I've done, and I sort of played around with, how do you display the time? Is it digital? Is it analog? Do you spell it out? Is there an illustration with it? What does that look like? What other information do you include? And I sort of got stuck and was overwhelmed and looking at all this stuff. But it just so happened that while we were doing this, it was right before the Doctor Who Christmas special. Is anyone here a Doctor Who fan? Right? I like you guys. Okay, so the first pack that we worked on was Time and Space, and I actually had already built these graphics, and we just sort of modified them to work on a smartwatch. And so this was where we started.
So the first lesson that we picked up, and some of these will be really obvious. You'll say, duh, how did you not realize that? But when we were down in the weeds, we actually didn't realize some of this stuff doing it. So the first lesson is circle watches versus square watches.
So I usually use a graphics program called Adobe Illustrator, and I have an artboard that is square or rectangular. And without even thinking, I'm sort of laying stuff out and looking at it, and I'm so pleased with myself that I've done a watch face, right? That I'm like, here it is, it's done. Jono, build the watch face. Except what works on a square layout might not work on a circular layout. Which sounds obvious, I know, but at the time when you're working on it, it's sort of easy to forget these things.
What you can note about this is the way Virginia solved this problem is we actually adjusted the design so that they would work on both square or round watch faces. You can adjust the things, you can move or change the sizes, and you can actually get it to fit on both because these are relatively simple. But for the programmers, you can actually detect this stuff too. You can say, oh, this is a round watch. I can render a totally different layout for a round watch than I do for a square watch. So even though in our examples, you'll see that we chose the same layout for both, you have the ability to make it radically different if that's something that you want to do. So our next lesson was placement of things. We're going to talk in a little bit more detail later about general placement, but this is in regard to notifications, which are little cards that come up on your watch.
So again, this might seem really obvious, but I'm working on the watch face with a TARDIS, and again, I'm super pleased with myself, except that the problem is, with the positioning of the time on here, if a notification pops up, it covers that up, which is not the end of the world, but it's certainly not a best practice, and it's something that I would recommend people try to avoid.
This one, by the way, is one of my favorites. You can't see the animations, but the TARDIS like blinks, and same with the sonic screwdriver ones. So check these out. We have a link later, I think on the last page, so check them out. And a new version of this hopefully coming soon. But yeah, so another thing here, this is just like the last example. As a programmer, you can detect this. You can know that that card is up, and if you choose to have the time at the bottom, maybe for good reason, because that's where it fits into your design, when a notification card actually comes up, you can choose to actually adjust that time, move it somewhere else temporarily until the card goes away. So, you know, you can, again, change your whole layout so it works in all cases, or you can just detect these things programmatically and make a change. Next lesson was emulator versus real watches, and I guess this one's for me. So Virginia does the design. I'm not very artistically inclined at all. I play a little music, but when it comes to actually drawing things or doing illustrations, I'm really bad. Programmer art is, I guess, what you would call my art. So anyway, she gives me all of the things. She gives me the layout. She gives me instructions on where things are to be. And I got really happy with it in the emulator. And I'm showing here a square emulator, but there's also a round emulator, so you can use either. And we were ready to release. We put it into the Play Store. We were ready to go, and we actually put it on regular watches. And what we saw is that it was actually radically different. I don't remember the colors being quite that different, although when I just did these recently, they did come out that different. But anyway, the lesson here is obviously make sure you test on the real device. And we'll point out some lessons later that are specific for different types of watches. But it's also important that if you have more than one watch, or you have somebody else, or you have a set of beta testers that you can use in the Play Store, do that. Because a lot of the watches have different pixel densities. They use different technologies for the screen. They're even have a different dimension based on round versus square. So there's a lot of variation. And if you count on the emulator to do most of your layout and positioning, it'll be wrong. Yeah.
I've reached out to friends and other people that have different watches, and so I'll specifically send them a link ahead of time that says, can you install this and let me know what it looks like? Are there any problems? Often I won't give them any information, and they'll just send photos back like, here's what it looks like. I hope this is right.
So, you know, another thing, if you've used the Play Store before for Android apps for just a phone, Google has a really good alpha and beta program actually built into the Play Store. So when you put your stuff into the store, you don't have to release it publicly. You can create a Google Plus community. You can add people, or even go out and say, hey, who's interested? Anybody have these types of watches? Add them to that community, and then you give them a private link. And only people in that community can access it and use it. So that's another thing that we do. We kind of do a call, and then we do a private beta before we do a public release. Because we also don't have all of the watches. So same thing. Yeah, so that's another good question. A lot of one-on-one communication through Hangout is how we've done it. So once we find there's an issue, we have them take pictures of what things look like, and then we'll do another beta release. They'll get an update, test it, take a picture, give it back to us. So it's a lot of communication through Hangouts, and often releasing into the beta program in the store.
And thanking them profusely for helping us.
Yeah, it's a little clunky, but when we don't have every watch, and in fact, some of the new ones are really radically different than the ones that we have here today. So the only way to know that it's going to work is to get it to some of those people and then have them give you feedback often. So yeah, and Virginia also does art that is not digital. So often, thank you so much for your help. Here's a picture of your dog or something, and frame it. So we have that as an incentive. She'll do
I'm
some
our
design
PR
for
and
them.
marketing team too.
Right. Okay.
So after we had worked on the Doctor Who watch faces, and we were experts, but we were not experts, this was the next pack that we worked on, and it was 4 original illustrations that we released in the Play Store. And again, we learned a lot with this by doing it the wrong way first.
So configuration activities. So when you create watch faces, there's a way that you can give your users the ability to change things through configuration activities. So what you're seeing here on the one side with the octopus, that's the watch face. Obviously, it's rendered on a watch. On the right-hand side, you're seeing a configuration activity. In this case, it's on a phone. The way it works is you go into the Android Wear Google app, and you can actually select the octopus watch face. And when you do that, you'll see a little gear on top of that. That means that there's a specific configuration activity for that watch face. When you click on that gear, it actually launches the thing you see here that gives you the different color palettes, and that's just an Android activity. So for example, if I were to click the orange box or the green box here in the octopus color, real time on my watch, that would change. Now in this case, it's on my phone. So I actually go on and I launch that activity on my phone and I can change things. However, you can also do configuration activities right on the watch. And I'll talk about a little bit why you might want to choose that over this a little bit later in the presentation.
So why would we want to add that? We wanted to add that because I wanted people to be able to customize the watch faces into something that they liked. But it's worth pointing out that for this specific watch face and illustration, there's 3 different things that they can set. So my concern was I didn't want users to get frustrated by giving them too many choices, right? So for the 2 watch faces that are a little more complicated, I actually chose a color palette and made sure that no matter what combination they used, it would still look good. So there was sort of no way for people to screw it up and end up with something that they didn't like the way that it looked, or they were frustrated by using it. The other 2 faces are just 1 or 2 colors that they can pick anything, and I wasn't as worried about that because you can pick 1 color, that's fine. But for some of them, I did set a palette for that reason.
So what's the lesson here? So we told you about what a configuration activity is, and it worked great when we gave people choose a couple colors. We monitor our feedback like crazy in the Play Store. We look at our ratings, and we go through and we answer any questions people have. I mean, really simple things like, hey, I installed this and it's not on my watch yet. Hey, it might take 5 minutes. Give it a little bit of time to sync up. But specifically with these configuration activities, what we found is people said, I want to change this color. Hey, I want to change the way the tick marks look. Hey, I want to put the date over here. Hey, I want to use a different format for the date. Hey, I want to spin this upside down. I want to do this. I want to do all these things. At first, we tried to respond to all these, but then we realized, we can't, if we're getting to the point where we're actually creating a watch face maker instead of releasing a watch face. So be intentional about what you allow your users to configure and have a cutoff point that makes sense and be able to describe that. We chose to do it for this reason, and that way you can answer those questions that come in via the Play Store without getting your users angry. Next lesson is ambient mode. This one really got me. So this is another watch face from that pack. This is actually one that you could pick any color you like. And in this case, what you're looking at is when the watch is active, it's in this active mode. And you can do a lot more things in active mode than you can do when it's in ambient mode. For example, you can do animations. You can have the second hand tick every second. You can even have the second hand animate smoothly around. There's a lot of things that you can do. You can have your users interact with it and click on things. After a few seconds, the watch face, to save battery, goes into ambient mode. Now, this is only the case if you choose to have your watch in always-on mode. A lot of people, self-included, when my watch goes into ambient mode, I choose to have the screen turn off because that actually saves a lot more battery. However, some people choose to keep it always on, so here we created a basic grayscale version of the same image. So what's the problem? I mean, this actually worked great. We actually released it just like this. We already put it in the store. We got it out there. We actually had a lot of users because this was featured in one of Google's watch face packs. And all of a sudden, we started getting pictures from people that looked like this. This is a slight exaggeration, but it's about right. What happened? We had a grayscale image, and all of a sudden there's these bright green and blue colors in it. And after some reading, what I learned is based on the screen, the watch technology that's used in the face for the display, there are different modes that this ambient mode supports. Some do grayscale. Some do not do grayscale, and if you give it grayscale, it's going to do crazy things like render colors. There's some really technical jargon by how it all works. I don't really understand it. I just know it looks crazy. We couldn't figure it out because in the emulators and all the watches that we had, it looked fine. So we found out about this low-bit ambient mode, which is black and white only. Similar to the last lessons learned, what we chose to do is just go black and white for all of our ambient modes. What you can do is you can detect I'm in low-bit ambient mode or I'm in regular ambient mode, and you could do a grayscale version versus a black and white version. But again, for simplicity's sake and consistency across the brand, we just go to black and white all the time now to avoid that situation on the left. I think right now it's the Sony watch and the Asus Zen watches that go into low-bit mode, but more and more coming out towards the end of this year, so you have no idea how many will do this down the road.
So that brings us to the next pack that we had worked on, which was another set of illustration watch faces. And what did we learn in this case? We learned nothing, because what I actually unintentionally did was created an even bigger mess for Jono to build, because I added more configuration activities and more animations and more choices and more stuff to build. Sorry about that.
Yeah, unlike the last time where it was just colors, now you can turn animations on and off. You can choose to show or hide all types of things on the screen. We were trying to still cater to all those people who gave us feedback in the Play Store, and we really did just throw in everything at it. And it still wasn't enough, because even released with all of the additional configuration activities, more users came in. And that was really, again, we didn't have a good cutoff. We didn't have a good reason for we're stopping here. We just threw in everything. Everything is configurable. And if you're going to do that, you might as well build a watch face maker, not a specific watch face. However, we did learn some real lessons during this also. And this is where we get in. I mentioned this early on in the agenda, but battery life. So in this example, this car you can't see here. I should have actually animated it. But this car, the tires spin, the rainbow moves under it, the clouds move, so it's really dynamic when it's in the active mode, when it's not in ambient mode. And I think we were to the point where it was almost done and we were testing it. And I think the battery lasted maybe 2 hours or 3 hours. So you are going to really tick off your users if you give them 2 hours using your watch face. So what we had to do, and actually it was a friend of ours at an event like this that said, hey, how are you cutting these things up? So you have a car, you have the clouds, you've got these rainbows. And I kind of went the easy way in. I told Virginia, give me these big bitmaps that have everything, and give me 16 of them that have everything in different states, and I'll just swap out every huge bitmap as I animate this thing. Well, that's clearly going to kill the battery. What we got it down to was one car image, one cloud image, and everything else we did with just native components drawing on the Android canvas. A lot more battery efficient. And actually, this is one of our better watch faces now when it comes to battery life. It works really well. So you have to really be intentional with how many images you use, making them as small as possible. If two things are always rendered together in an image, don't make it two images, make it a single image. And there are a lot of little tips like that that you can do that will drastically improve battery life. Also, not just images. Don't do a lot of calculations in your draw method. There's a draw method that ticks. And if you do a lot of calculations on positioning or figuring things out in that method, that also is going to kill your battery. So you just really have to think about the architecture and where you do things, and you can drastically improve battery life. Okay.
So that brings us to FitCat for Wear, which Jono likes because he got a couple weeks off from me bossing him around. I actually worked with another developer named Chuki Chan. And I would actually really encourage you guys to find her on social media. She's great, and she shares a lot of great information. So she had this idea and did the development, and I provided the illustrations. So initially, we were on a really short timeline because she wanted to release this before I/O. So when it was initially released, it was just a cat that is animated, and the images would just change randomly over the course of the day. And the only thing it displayed was the time. However, she then built in additional functionality and integrated Google Fit. So how it stands now is that the cat changes activities based on your step count. So when you wake up, the cat's sleeping, the cat's on a laptop, the cat's playing with yarn. But as you become more active over the course of the day, the cat is then scuba diving or skateboarding or mountain climbing. And he becomes more fit as you get more steps. What we realized was that when we went from one piece of information to 4 pieces of information, it got a little bit harder to read, especially at a glance, which is not good. We didn't want that for the users. So that was a relatively simple solution in that we chose a different font that was easier to see at a glance, and we only applied it to some of the information, but again, that was a good solution for that because it solved the problem of glanceability.
It's important that your users can read the time. That's definitely
I would say
important in
that's
the
the
watch.
most important function of the watch, for
And-
sure.
And then this one specifically for, this one is for fitness, so the step count also really important in this, and it was really hard to read. And I don't even think the middle image you have here does it justice. I think it might have been even smaller and harder to read at first, but yeah.
So that brings us to the pack that we just released, which is RetroTech watch faces. This is a very recent one, and what did we learn in this case? Keep it simple, stupid. So we did not add any configuration activities. It's worth noting that the illustrations and design in this pack are a lot more complicated. There's a lot more going on in the background, so there also wasn't a simple, valid way to sort of break that up and allow users to customize it. I mean, in some cases maybe, but not really. So we just left it as is. What you see is what you get.
Yeah, and we're not saying configuration activities are bad. It's just be smart about when you use them. So don't be like us. There are a lot of resources out there that we could have read and used to avoid some of these issues, and it would have saved us a lot of time. Oh, again, sorry, don't be like me.
I made him add that.
So here's just 2 examples. If you look, this is the documentation from the design pages on Android Wear, and this one's specifically talking about ambient mode. And right here, it tells you optimize for special screens. It gives you information on that low-bit ambient mode, and it tells you the types of things that you have to do. Had I read this, we wouldn't have gone through the release. We wouldn't have gotten the bad feedback initially on Google Play, and we wouldn't have ruined several weekends running around trying to fix this. So definitely take a look at that. A second one, this one, I think the text is hilarious. Your design should ensure the system indicators remain visible and that users can still read the time when notification cards appear. And that is exactly, I think, our second lesson. Notification appears, hides the time. So again, right there, it couldn't be more plain. And we just kind of skipped it, making neat-looking watch faces, but not considering things like the UI elements. Now, a few other tips. These are some things that are kind of common. We've seen them a bit in the community. We didn't necessarily hit these during development of these watch faces, so we put them here at the end. But I think they warrant quick mention if you're going to be developing watch faces. First, system indicators. So there are these indicators that show you things like whether you're charging, whether you have a connection or disconnected from your phone. So it gives you a little bit of status. Virginia would do these great images that would have certain detail in certain areas. I wouldn't think at all about where these indicators would go because they were an afterthought, and then they'd be buried in the center of a really complex area in the design, and your users couldn't see it. So it's important that you account for these things when you're actually doing your design. Leave room for it. Second thing, this one really got me. Use relative measurements. So even the Google examples, to be honest, use DPs, the density independent pixel measurement. So put the time over this many pixels. The problem with that is, again, these watch faces are all, or the different watches are all very different. It used to be that all the round watches were 320 by 320 and all the square watches were 280 by 280. That is no longer the case. So even things that I used to depend on as being a rule of thumb are no longer a rule of thumb. So even Google now says use relative measurements. So you can get what is the width and what is the height. And what we do is we actually say put this element on the page 1/128th of the distance of the width over. Put this element 1/4 of the way down of the total height on the screen. And that way, you can rest assured that things are actually positioned about the same on all watch faces. One thing you do have to think about, though, are font sizes, because that doesn't account for font sizes. But as far as overall positioning goes, relative measurements work actually really well. We talked about this changes between modes, how you can actually detect these things programmatically. In this case, it's ambient mode changing. So here you can see there's a method that fires, hey, this thing either just went into or out of ambient mode, and then you're able to detect if it's that low bit ambient mode or not, and actually account for that. Maybe render something totally different, maybe turn things on and off. Wearable configuration activity. I actually want to talk to some of the Google folks here that hopefully know a little bit about this. I put this slide in specifically because of the announcement about the iPhone. So the iPhone is now going to support the new watches, the new Android Wear watches. Couldn't use it with an iPhone before, had to be an Android watch. Now, we have a bunch of watch faces that have a configuration activity that you can change colors and things on a phone. But that configuration activity is an Android app. It's an Android activity that is launched on the phone. That is not going to work on an iOS device. So if we would have created our configuration activity to run on the watch, and you're able to install watch faces that are our third-party watch faces through the app on an iPhone, then you could still do all the customization on an iPhone Android Wear pair also. Again, I'm not entirely sure. We haven't tested this yet, but it seems to be a logical thing that configuration on the watch, not on the phone. Packaging wearable apps, I think, and I use Stack Overflow all the time. This is one of the most common issues that I've seen. You don't put in the store a watch face. You don't put in the store an Android Wear app. You're actually putting in a mobile app that is like a smartphone app that is tied to the wearable app. And when you install it on your phone, it automatically installs on the watch, if you follow about 5 rules. So take a hard look at this page, because if you don't, you'll have your users installing the app on the phone. Nothing shows up on the phone. Nothing shows up on the watch. It's hard to test this too, because when you're in development and you're signing things with a development certificate, you can't test this. So you actually have to do a final release APK and install that on your phone to test if it automatically installs on the watch. But anyway, there's about 5 things you have to do to ensure that installation happens. Make sure you take a look at them.
So what are we working on now? Jono kind of created a monster, because initially when we got the smartwatches, he was the one that had the idea of we should build stuff and make stuff with these watches, and I was like, okay, I guess. And now he's like, I'm busy, and I'm like, no, you're not, because I just made like 6 more images and I want them all on a watch face. So I actually had a bunch of illustrations that I had done of the various doctors. So we want to add that to the Time and Space watch face pack as some free extras. And I actually just got a BB-8 droid from Best Buy, at which I haven't put down in days. So I had to make a BB-8 illustration. So I feel like that should be a watch face as well.
And what's interesting about this is I think it's relatively new. Even though you could always do it, there's now an official way to do interactive watch faces. So before, a watch face was just a service. It runs, it has a GUI that your users can see. It goes ambient, they tap it, the GUI comes back on. That was it. Now they have this concept of interactive watch faces. So you can touch things on the watch face and launch other activities or do things by interacting with it. So the droid is going to be our first attempt at taking a user's input on the watch face and doing interesting things with it. And with that being said, I think we're ready to take some questions if
Any
we have
questions?
time. So the question, it was, any tips? Do we have any tips on monetization?
So we have, of the packs that we showed you, only the original illustration packs we charge for. It's 99 cents. Honestly, I should know more about people adding monetization or upgrades or add-ons, and I honestly don't.
So, I mean, I guess the way we've handled things, we do a mix. So we try to give a good amount of things away, and we use that to learn. And only when we spend, like some of the illustration watch faces with the really complex configuration activities. Really took a long time, a lot of effort to go into, so we charged for those. But as a rule of thumb, I don't even think that's a rule of thumb for us. I think it's basically based on effort for us. And Virginia is maybe accidentally, but she's very good at marketing and has a community that she's always interacting with. And one thing that we have found really useful is Virginia shares along the way. So by the time we get to release, pictures of the watch faces have been out. She's got little GIF animations that show it, and she's already built a community that wants it, whether it's free or paid, right? Yeah. So BB-8 or the Droid. Yeah. Does that help? Yeah. Okay. You'll be next. So this platform, the one we've used, is for only Android Wear platform, so it won't work with like the Samsung Tizen watches or anything like that. Some apps and some watch faces target specific watches. Like I've seen some things that target round watches only, and they look really good on round, and there's several different brands that support round. But generally, you find people supporting all of the Android Wear platform, and that's right now, I don't know, maybe seven, eight different types of watches, and a whole new slew of them about to come out at the end of this year.
That's actually my question. With all the new watches, I mean, we know Android has the watch over a year now, but Apple has released the watch, and that gets the market booming. So everybody's going to do a smartwatch. Are you going to be able to have a watch face what fits on all the watches? Because that's obviously the difficult thing when you create those to make them fit, and there's going to be different sizes, different technologies, and who knows what else comes out.
Well, I mean, from a development point of view, I am anticipating having to go through and update probably all of our stuff as the new ones come out. We noticed a change with the Urbane, that one. Things got significantly different on that watch face than any of the ones prior to it. It seems like the new ones are kind of following in the footsteps of the way the Urbane renders things. So we're hoping that if that is supported, that the new ones are, but no way to tell until they're out. So I'm anticipating a bunch of work. I don't know, do you have a comment?
I volunteered to wear the new $1,200 watch that was coming out, so we'll see how that goes.
Question in the back. So, yeah. So the way it works is there's the way we've done it, there's a couple different ways to do it, but there's a custom service that is basically the watch face, and you extend from that service. In there's a draw method, you have a canvas. So we're actually rendering bitmaps on the canvas. We're rendering paints that are text paints on the canvas. And that's correct, based on the length and width, right? Yep. And we try to do that one time. So just a tip too, there's the on surface changed, which you can use on phones. They have the same thing for the watch. I found it does not work right. If you try to get the canvas dimensions there, you can get them, but they don't work right for me. So I've moved everything into the draw method, but I only run it one time. So I keep a flag basically. Hey, is this the first time through? Yep, get the measurements, set up all my relative stuff, and then it stays the same after that. Yep. Any other questions? All right, lunchtime. Thank you guys.
Thank you.